with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. President Clinton today accused the Republicans of whipping up hysteria over Whitewater, insisting that this is no Watergate. He also gave a spirited defense of Hillary, but the Republicans were not deterred. Senate GOP leader Bob Dole said there is something lurking in what he called the Whitewater bog. That's his term for that failed Arkansas real estate deal that the Clintons lost money in. We begin tonight with NBC's Andrea Mitchell on how all of this is permeating the White House.
The Whitewater mess has so overwhelmed the White House that during a joint news conference with a visiting foreign leader, the president ended up defending his wife's ethics.
I have never known a person with a stronger sense of right and wrong in my life, ever. And I do not believe for a moment that she has done anything wrong.
Mr. Clinton tried to conduct business as usual, but the White House was practically turned upside down today, searching for documents the special counsel has demanded relating to questionable meetings between White House aides and federal regulators. Asked whether he had received advance warning that the government was investigating Whitewater, Mr. Clinton could not remember.
I don't remember when I knew about it or who told me about it, but it was just sort of presented as a fact, a decision that had been made by the government. And I didn't think much about it at the time.
Deputy White House counsel Joel Klein sent detailed instructions today to every staff member, hundreds of people. They must search through trash, burn bags, electronic mail. Each must certify that everything has been turned in. As a precaution, no trash, not even from the press room, is being picked up from anywhere in the White House. Officials said the President and First Lady will also comply with the subpoena and turn over their documents, including diaries. Lawyers will review all the material before deciding whether to assert executive privilege. 6 top staff members have a bigger problem. They've had to hire lawyers and prepare to testify on Thursday.
And people outside the White House generally take the position, well, why should I deal with these folks? They're busy dealing with subpoenas. And so it can bring things to a halt pretty quickly.
Meanwhile, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Banking Committee said he would not hold Whitewater hearings because the special counsel said it could damage his investigation. That won't stop the Republicans.
This involves a whole network of questions, and they need to be dealt with, I think, across the board.
NBC News has learned that officials are discussing 4 people to become the top White House lawyer. Former Carter officials Lloyd Cutler, Charles Renfrew, and Charles Roth, and LBJ advisor Harry McPherson, although the president might not be able to talk any of them into taking it. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News at the White House.
With all of this talk of subpoenas, a key White House resignation over the weekend, a Republican suggesting impeachment, the president vigorously defending his wife, the core questions remain tonight. What is under investigation and why? We've asked NBC's Pete Williams to bring us up to date.
For Robert Fisk, the independent counsel appointed in January, the investigation leads in many directions. At its heart is Madison Guarantee, a Little Rock savings and loan. When it failed in 1989, it cost taxpayers at least $50 million to bail it out. Question, was any money from the savings and loan improperly channeled into the Whitewater land development in the Ozarks, in which Bill and Hillary Clinton were partners? And was any Madison money improperly funneled into Governor Bill Clinton's re-election campaign? The investigation also leads to Little Rock's Rose Law Firm, where First Lady Hillary Clinton was a partner. Question, since Madison was once a client, was it proper for the firm later to represent the federal government in a lawsuit against Madison's accountants? Another Rose partner was Vincent Foster, who handled Whitewater and Madison legal issues for the Clintons. He served as a White House legal advisor until his body was found last July in a suburban Washington park. Question, what drove him to suicide? Question, did it have anything to do with Whitewater? And how did the White House handle documents in the office immediately after Foster died? On Meet the Press, Vice President Gore was asked if he had any doubts that Foster committed suicide.
No, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever.
Another question, has any evidence relevant to Fisk's investigation been destroyed? A Rose Law Firm courier has told the grand jury that he was ordered to shred some documents earlier this year.
Yeah, the FBI had asked me if I'd shredded any documents pertaining to Hillary Clinton, Vincent Foster, Jim McGuire went through all those names, and I'd said that I had shredded some documents for Mr. Foster's.
And now the latest question. Were any laws broken when Treasury Department officials warned the White House that a criminal case involving Madison was coming?
There's no way to know when Fisk will have his answers. He has rented an apartment in Little Rock with a 1-year lease. Pete Williams, NBC News, Washington.
A key man for the Republicans in the Whitewater investigation is Representative Jim Leach of Iowa, senior Republican on the House Banking Committee. a moderate, not one of the GOP attack dogs, but the most persistent critic of Whitewater to this point. Congressman, 7 weeks ago, you said that Whitewater was a modest issue, not of impeachment proportions. Have you changed your mind about that?
No, I haven't, but I always knew there was a little fire with all the smoke, but I think what was a campfire has spread now to the grass, and it may hit the forest unless a little more attention at the White House is given to credible ethical standards.
But what is worse, the Whitewater deal itself or the White House handling of it to this point?
Oh, gosh, it's the ethical principles around Whitewater and the question of conflicts of interest, possible tax policy, possible illegal gratuity, as well as in a minor way, a campaign abuse.
The White House has moved for an independent investigator, and yet Senator Phil Gramm, one of your Republican colleagues, said if the president doesn't come clean in all of this, he may not serve out his term. Can you blame the president for accusing your party of whipping up hysteria, given those kinds of statements?
Well, I think Phil probably exaggerated the issue, and I wouldn't put it in those terms. But I would say we have here a serious issue of public ethics. If we have full disclosure, civil accountability, we can put it behind us. But that's up to the White House.
But the independent counsel may take up to a year to complete his investigation. Is that too long for this country to go through that?
I think it is a bit too long, and I would stress that the independent counsel has a much broader mandate. There are a number of other possible areas of criminal investigation that don't precisely touch the President and First Lady. My own guess is you can deal with the President and First Lady's issue in a relatively short time frame.
All right, thank you very much, Congressman Jim Leach. We'll be hearing much more from you, of course, about all of this in the weeks to come. And when we come back...
First tonight, the continuing Washington firestorm over Whitewater. Over the weekend, White House counsel Bernard Nussbaum resigned amid criticism of his repeated contact with federal officials who are investigating President and Mrs. Clinton's ties to a failed Arkansas savings and loan. To voice on Whitewater, he joins us from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Jay.
The president said there's no analogy between Whitewater and Watergate. Do you agree with him?
Well, I partly do. I mean, Watergate was all about an abuse of presidential power by a president in office. This is about a possible abuse of the public trust by a president prior to taking office. That's a major distinction.
When you hear fellow Republicans, for instance, Senator Gramm, suggest that this could destroy his presidency, he said if he wants to serve out his term, he's going to have to level with the American people. Is it as serious as that?
I don't think so. Frankly, I always knew there was a little bit of fire with all the smoke, but I always thought of it as a campfire. The way it's been handled, however, it's as if the fire has now reached the grasses and could approach the trees. There's no reason that that should occur. There's nothing that full disclosure and a full accounting can't put behind this administration. And I'm simply sorry that what I thought would be a 1 to 2 or 3 week issue has exploded the way this one has.
Exploded, in your view, why? Because of White House actions?
Well, because of decisions to, rather than to be open. I mean, when I've always thought of Bill Clinton, I thought he was a pretty open guy. But we're setting unprecedented standards of denial of information flows. The commitment today is to obey the law and to cooperate with a special counsel who keeps information confidential. And the challenge is, will they open up the records of the various banks and S&Ls to a congressional inquiry where information can be made public? It's public disclosure, not a criminal pursuit, that I think is appropriate at this time.
You said this morning on the Today Show there was here an implication of obstruction of justice. Just spell out what facts led you to that observation.
Well, that is the implication of the special counsel's subpoenaing of White House records relating to the very improper conduct of the executive branch. We have very precise ethical guidelines that apply to the Treasury Department, the RTC, and the White House.
The RTC is the Resolution Trust Corporation, which is disposing of the failed savings and loans.
That's correct. Yeah. That stipulate that they have to be operated with impartiality, that they cannot give preferential treatment to any American citizen, and that they can't operate outside standard operating procedures. All of this occurred, and that is why, very unfortunately, you had the general counsel or the president's counsel kind of pressed into a resignation circumstance. I think he was trying to defend his president. I have nothing against Mr. Nussbaum, but the circumstance which the subpoenas are being issued at is very serious, because for the first time it raises the question of presidential conduct in office, and that puts it in a different dimension. But I have been very loath to make a kind of assumption that this can go in a direction that is presidency jeopardizing. I think civil accountability is fully appropriate, and when it occurs, this episode can be put behind us.
What do you think is the most serious threat hanging over the Clintons?
Well, the serious threat is that the whole circumstance defined as Whitewater represents conflicts of interest that may go a little bit beyond simply conflicts of interest. Ties to a savings and loan that costs the taxpayer $60 million, which makes it part of the whole S&L debacle that costs the taxpayer $250 billion. These are very serious circumstances. In addition, you have a situation in which the governor of the state entered a business arrangement with the head of the S&L, a business arrangement in which a careful reading would indicate that the governor put in very little, if anything. The S&L owner put in quite a lot, and based on that, were there implicit or explicit quid pro quos that occurred that cost the taxpayer money? And does that then mean that there were the possibility that illegal gratuities occurred and that taxes were improperly recorded and possibly tax deductions improperly taken? So you have questions of tax policy, questions of possible illegal gratuity, as well as some campaign abuses.
Do you have any information about the report that appeared in the Washington Times this morning alleging that Mrs. Clinton ordered files shredded after this whole Whitewater affair surfaced in the '92 election?
I have no personal information to that effect. Obviously, we get lots and lots of reports that many times we cannot confirm. And I have no personal information that would lead me to be able to either verify or object to the Washington Times story.
Do you see Mrs. Clinton in more jeopardy than her husband?
No, I don't. Frankly, this is a matter that they're possibly both deeply involved in, and that they're both quarter owners, and so they had a 50-50 ownership with the president of the S&L's family. But Arkansas strikes me as a state of a lot of good old boy kinds of deal making, and that this is not something Mrs. Clinton could have done on her own. And she's never been the focus of the banking committee probe. We're looking at the failure of an S&L, the cost to the taxpayer, why it occurred, and the public lessons that should be attended to it.
The independent counsel, for whose appointment you campaigned almost alone for a while, today urged Congress not to hold hearings because he said it would pose a severe risk to the integrity of his investigation. In view of that, and he was a Republican by politics before his appointment, do you still think there should be congressional hearings, investigation?
Well, let me stress, I think Mr. Fisk is a very honorable man taking an honorable position. But he misreads here the Constitution. He also misreads the effect of hearings.
Actually, he said in his letter to the chairman he recognizes the constitutional prerogative of the Congress to exercise oversight and so on.
Well, he indicated he recognized it, but he sent a very chilling message to Congress. And the irony is that the only reason subpoenas were issued in the White House was information that came from a congressional hearing, in this case on the Senate side. The House of Representatives has had a number of hearings related to S&Ls. At the same time, there have been judicial investigations. In fact, my own view is if we hadn't held those hearings, there's a good chance that people like Charles Keating would be free today instead of behind bars. But I would stress that the one example in which hearings upset the process was in Iran-Contra, where immunity was granted a series of people. The minority doesn't have any capacity to grant immunity to anyone. The Banking Committee has no history of granting immunity. All we want is public disclosure, and all we want is a review of the lessons for Congress in terms of legislation. I'll give you an example. We have in Whitewater what in effect may well have been operated a company as a partial subsidiary of an S&L, using an abusive direct investment kind of authority. That ought to be reviewed. And I think there ought to be an understanding that we shouldn't give that kind of power to federally insured institutions again.
So you will continue to press for hearings?
Well, I think hearings are appropriate, but hearings with very careful understanding that information should not be brought up in such a way as to tamper with the process that Mr. Fisk is involved in. As a matter of fact, we're sending Mr. Fisk tomorrow a lot of very interesting information that will be private for his review that I think will be very helpful to his investigation. I would expect hearings to be extremely helpful to his investigation.
The way things are going, do you think your Democratic colleagues are going to accede to your desire to have hearings?
Well, I don't know. Frankly, the Democratic Party on the Hill is in a bit of a dilemma. If they go forth with hearings, they know that it'll be a little bit embarrassing to their president. If they don't go forth, they will become complicitous in a great effort to silence the public issues. And what's at question is really whether the policy of the Democratic Party is going to be one of open government or kind of hiding and shredding. I think that's a very interesting question to review. And as far as partisanship is concerned, it isn't good enough to respond by charging other people are partisan. One has to respond by openly disclosing in a public kind of way.
Well, Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Now we get the White House view. George Stephanopoulos is President Clinton's senior advisor for policy and strategy. He joins us from the old Executive Office building next to the White House. Mr. Stephanopoulos, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Robin. How are you?
On the Today Show this morning, you said, you asked the question, did the damage control create a lot more damage than it controlled? What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that, as the President has said, in the White House, even though we don't believe we did anything unethical or anything wrong, clearly we created some impressions that we wish we hadn't have created. We wish these meetings had not happened, for example. And we recognize that a lot of these problems right now are self-inflicted, and we're doing our best right now to turn that around. In fact, the President has been very aggressive in the last several days to set up a firewall between the White House and any investigative bodies who are looking into any of these matters. The President has asked for full compliance with all of the subpoenas, with all of the work of the special counsel. The President is moving aggressively to bring a new counsel to the President into the White House who will set a standard of excellence that nobody can question. So we recognize our past mistakes. Obviously, we do believe that there was some partisanship on the part of the Republicans as well, but we recognize our mistakes and we're moving forward.
What's the difference between damage control and cover-up? Where can one bleed into the other?
Robin, I think you have to be very careful about using words like cover-up. I know the Representative Leach is very skillful, and he's been relatively calm at times, but for instance, he talks about shredding. In the last charges, the Democrats will be the party of shredding. Now, earlier when you asked him about shredding, he said he has no information about that. The Clintons have absolutely denied the story in the Washington Times today, and there's no evidence that anybody in the White House or anything like that has been involved in any way with a cover-up or anything like shredding. In fact, we're doing the exact opposite of a cover-up. We're fully complying with the subpoenas of the special counsel. We're moving forward. We're answering questions from the press. We've had testimony before the Congress. I would point out, you know, the Republicans want to have it both ways. For weeks, they called on us to have a special counsel. Get this out of the White House. Put it in a special counsel. We do that, and then when we act consistent with compliance with the special counsel, they say that's not good enough. You must act now.
Do you agree with Congressman Leach that some actions, and you've mentioned regret about the meetings that took place, have left an implication of obstruction of justice?
Well, that's for us to clear up. I believe there was no obstruction of justice. In fact, I'm quite confident of that.
But you understand the implication in, or the what is the inference in some minds that that's what it amounts to.
Well, of course we understand, and that's why the president is going the extra mile to make sure that everybody understands that he wants full compliance, that he wants everybody to cooperate right now, that he wants the facts out, that he wants full cooperation with the special counsel.
Do you agree? The Wall Street Journal said late last week, Mr. Nussbaum, the recently resigned White House counsel, that his actions, quote, left the impression the White House was stalling and even stonewalling in matters related to the Whitewater and to Mr. Foster's suicide.
Again, I don't think so, and I think that it will come out that we've acted in an ethical and responsible manner. We have to be very sensitive to appearances, and that's what we're trying to do right now. I'm not going to criticize any of the actions of Bernie Nussbaum. He did a fine and loyal job for the president. He served him very faithfully. But we're looking forward now. The president is actively engaged in looking for a new counsel, and we are going to set the highest possible standards for ethical conduct.
To come back to the shredding question in the Washington Times story today, are you saying the White House denies that Mrs. Clinton ordered documents shredded?
Yes.
She did not order documents shredded?
Yes, that's right.
So when the president said at his news conference today, look, law firms dispose of documents all the time, what did he mean by that?
That's also true. I think he was responding to an article last week in the New York Times which talked about shredding of documents at the Rose Law Firm, which no one knows or no one is even charged that those had to do with Whitewater in any way. The president would state something as a matter of fact. Law firms and businesses of all kinds, maybe even McNeil Lair, shred documents as their files become full. That happens all of the time. The Rose Law Firm is no exception. But the White House had absolutely nothing to do with that. The Clintons had absolutely nothing to do with that.
So Mrs. Clinton did not order couriers for the Rose Law Firm to shred documents related to the Whitewater matter after it surfaced in the '92 election.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Why did the White House over the weekend, order the garbage held and then searched? Why would you suspect that relevant documents relevant to this inquiry would be in the garbage?
Again, we're just going the extra mile to make sure that there are absolutely no questions about the way this has been handled. So if that's part of it, so be it. We're just going the extra mile.
Could you understand that might create in some people's mind a suspicion that you feared that some of this stuff might have been thrown out?
I guess I can, but it seems a little perverse to me, Robin, when you're doing everything you can to make sure that no documents are destroyed, that everybody understands that you must comply, that you're doing everything you can to cooperate. I think that should be taken at its face value, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're making sure that every possible thing is saved, that there can be no questions about the way the White House is handling this.
Will all the administration officials, I believe it's 6 from the White House, and is it 3 or 4 from the Treasury?
I think it's 3, but I'm not positive.
Who have been subpoenaed by the independent counsel to appear before the grand jury on Wednesday, will they obey that subpoena?
Oh, I certainly expect so, yes.
Has that been decided yet?
Well, that's for them to decide. It's clear the president wants full cooperation and full compliance, and we expect that we'll get it.
There won't be any claim of executive privilege in the case of any one of them? Or?
Not to my knowledge, no.
What is this doing to the White House right now, in terms of everybody's attention, distraction from other issues and so on? The president referred to it a bit in his news conference.
Well, obviously, we're doing what we can over the last several days to get through this, to make sure that everybody knows we're cooperating and complying. So there is some short-term distraction in that. But we're determined not to be distracted at all from our long-term agenda, and we're going to get right back to it once we comply, once we cooperate. I would also add that most of the White House right now, most everybody in the White House is going around their daily normal business. They're doing their jobs. Everybody is working on the president's agenda. At the same time, we're making sure that we can demonstrate that we're in full compliance with all the requirements of the special counsel and others. So we're getting to work on that. But in the long run, it won't be a distraction. And as the president said, I think the American people would be disappointed and even outraged if they thought that we were distracted and the Congress was distracted from the people's business, from passing a health care plan, from passing a welfare reform plan, from passing a crime bill.
Do you think you might be?
Not at all. I think that we're now getting this behind us. We have set up the firewall that the president talked about between the White House and the investigative agencies, and we're going to move forward.
With even some Democrats on the Hill beginning to say, well, maybe hearings would be a good idea or might be necessary, Do you see this as beginning to weaken the president's authority in Congress with the big battles ahead that you've just mentioned?
Oh, I don't think so, Robin. I would say, first of all, that is a decision for the Congress to make. Mr. Fisk has put down his opinion on what it would mean for the special counsel. We're fully in compliance with the special counsel. We've cooperated with all of the hearings to date, but that's a decision for the Congress to make, and I believe they're also determined to get on with their business, with the legislative agenda for this year. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. You heard Congressman Leach's rationale for why there need to be congressional hearings in order to have full public disclosure. What is your answer to that?
Well, I would say that, first of all, there will be full public disclosure at the close of the special counsel's report. And if they're that determined to have hearings, they can wait until after the report comes through. But again, that is their decision. I would also say that the policy questions he's raised, all policies, which I would add, had happened under the Republican administration of the Resolution Trust Corporation, under the terms of Presidents Reagan and Bush, can all be looked at without regard necessarily to the issues involved in the special counsel's investigation. So nothing's stopping Representative Leach from doing that. Again, they have to make their decision. The special counsel believes that would interfere with his investigation. We think that's up to the Congress.
You heard Congressman Leach say what he thought, what kind of threat there was for the Clintons in this. What do you at the White House think there is?
We think that when the special counsel is done, it is going to show what the President and Mrs. Clinton has said all along. They did nothing wrong. They did not do anything illegal, and there's been no credible allegation, I would add one more time, despite all of the newspaper reports, despite all of the hearings, despite all the charges from the Republicans, about any violation of civil or criminal law by the Clintons. That still stands. We believe, as the President said, that this was a land deal he entered into 16 years ago. It lost money. He lost quite a bit of money, contrary to Representative Leach's implication in this deal, and that is the sum and substance of the matter. But again, the special counsel is doing his work. He will produce his report. We'll wait for that. We'll cooperate with it in the meantime.
Mr. Stephanopoulos, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.